I used to think we had a life most people would admire. So here's how it all went down. While you're here, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to know. I go by Clark, but honestly, I'm not picky about what people call me. My full name is Clark Archibald, and I've been married to Rachel for 4 years. We haven't had kids yet. Mostly because we both like having the freedom to do whatever we want, whenever we want. While that could change eventually, we both feel like it won't be anytime soon, probably not until we're well into our 30s. We both grew up in pretty humble circumstances, just a few blocks apart, though we didn't actually meet until we were 18 at a college recruitment event. Rachel was a standout in college, breezing through her courses and eventually landing a job as an accountant and credit controller. As for me, well, I wasn't exactly a star student. I didn't even graduate. But what I lacked in academic success, I made up for with hard work and a natural instinct for business. By the time I was 15, I was cleaning stores and offices around town. By 18, I was managing a team of 30 people and already had contracts with some of the city's bigger companies. Rachel was job hunting at that point, and I needed more staff. So when she came up to my table at the event and handed me her resume, she told me she wasn't looking for a cleaning job, but maybe I'd be interested in her phone number. I didn't waste any time. I called her before she even made it to the next table and asked her out for dinner. The next night we were out. 4 years later we were married. That college event turned out to be a stroke of luck for Rachel, too. She landed a job in the purchasing department at a construction company. She started at the bottom but worked her way up over 8 years, eventually heading both the purchasing and credit control departments. With both of us bringing in good incomes and no kids to support, we were living pretty comfortably. Meanwhile, my cleaning business grew into the largest office and store cleaning company in the city after I bought out a couple of competitors. It's not unusual for cleaners or security guards to be the first to notice anything of the ordinary in offices, and those observations often spark conversations among the staff. About 4 months ago, I was sitting at my desk when my secretary told me someone was waiting to see me in reception. She handed me a business card that read Kyle Chesterton, private investigator. I told her to send him in. When Kyle walked in, I shook his hand and asked what brought him by. After some brief pleasantries, he sat down and smiled. "Before we get into it," he said, "could I grab a cup of coffee? I haven't had any today, and I'm dying for one." I totally understood. Most business owners run on caffeine. My secretary quickly brought us both mugs, milk and sugar included. But neither of us touched them. After some more small talk, I steered the conversation in his direction. "So, Kyle, what can I do for you?" I asked. His smile grew wider. "Glad you asked. I'm currently working for a client who suspects his wife may be having an affair, or at least about to start one. She works as an accountant at Hancock F. Acturing, one of the bigger suppliers in the city. Recently, they hired a new salesman named Jameson Nelson, and this guy's got a history of targeting married women. He's been sending flowers, texting her late at night, taking her to lunch, nothing too out of the ordinary. But here's the twist. He's pushing for an overnight trip with her. I listened, mildly entertained by the whole spy game, but then something clicked. I recognized Hancock. That was the same company Rachel sourced materials from. And this Jameson guy? He sounded like a problem I needed to keep away from Rachel. I glanced back at Kyle, who was clearly waiting for me to speak. "Okay, I get it," I said. "How exactly can I help?" Kyle's grin widened. "Jameson leaves flowers, notes, and other personal items on her desk. She usually tosses them, but your cleaning staff could pick them up and pass them along to us. We'd have our legal team go over everything first, of course, but there's no issue with collecting personal trash. Our employer's already given us the green light." He handed me a card with the CEO's number, saying I could call to confirm. I didn't need to. The CEO's number was already saved in my phone. I dialed, and he answered immediately. "Clark," he said without any preamble. "I understand Kyle Chesterton is with you. You're authorized to share any non-company-related information with him. Our legal team will send a formal letter, but if you need anything else, just give me a call." I hung up, impressed by how quickly they wanted to handle it. "So, Are we on the same page? Kyle asked, grinning. Yeah, we're good, I replied. Just tell me what to look for, and we'll start sorting through her trash. You can pick it up every day at 11 a.m., he said. Will that work? Perfect, I confirmed. I gathered my team and Kyle walked us through what to look for: early lunches, late lunches, flowers, notes. For the next 6 weeks, we worked with him. At the end of the investigation, one of my employees reported that the woman hadn't returned to her office after lunch. Kyle followed them to a motel, and shortly after, the woman's marriage ended in divorce. Things went back to normal for us until one day Rachel seemed off. I tried to get her to open up, but she shut me down. About a week later, Bonnie, one of my longest-serving employees and someone I considered a close friend, came into my office. Bonnie had been with me almost from the beginning, and even though she was 25 years older than me, she always treated me like I was her kid. As she sat down, I could tell something was wrong. You remember that surveillance job a few months ago? She asked cautiously. Of course, I replied, raising an eyebrow. It was definitely an experience. Well, she hesitated. I work in the same office as your wife now, and I've noticed something. She paused again, clearly nervous. The man we were keeping an eye on, Jameson, he's been stopping by her office. I saw a big bouquet of flowers on her desk today, and she took them with her when she left for lunch. I even got a glimpse of the card that came with them. She handed me the card, and as I read it, my heart sank. Dear Rachel, it read, thank you for helping me renew my contract with your company. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I hope you'll join me for lunch soon. With love, Jameson. The note was far too familiar, too personal. And now, it seemed like my wife was Jameson's next target. I immediately turned to Bonnie and asked her to keep me posted if she found any more notes or flowers related to Jameson. Without wasting a second, I called Kyle. He picked up after the third ring. Clark, how can I help? He answered. I filled him in quickly. Bonnie, one of my staff members who worked on the previous case, now works in Rachel's office. She just told me that Jameson Nelson has started paying her visits, taking her to lunch, sending flowers. I've got one of the cards right here. Kyle let out a long breath. You're not the only one dealing with Jameson. Actually, you're the third husband involved in this. Would you be interested in teaming up with the others? Absolutely, I replied without hesitation. What's the next step? Kyle suggested we all meet at 2 p.m. and proposed, can you swing by my office? We'll get the paperwork sorted, exchange any relevant info, and move forward. I agreed, and by 1:55 p.m., I was at his office. Inside, I met Austin Ellington and William Howard, as well as Kyle and his associate Owen Myers, who was handling the data collection for the investigation. Kyle opened the meeting. Gentlemen, we're all here because we have a shared problem, Kyle began. Austin, William, this is Clark. He's interested in joining the investigation. If you're both okay with it, we'll officially bring him on board and start sharing information. They both nodded, and after a brief exchange, we all agreed. The paperwork took only about 15 minutes, during which I used my personal credit card to cover the $5,000 fee, so Rachel wouldn't see anything suspicious on our joint statements. Once everything was settled, Kyle addressed us all. The issue we're dealing with is Jameson Nelson. Just so you're caught up, Clark, Austin's wife works alongside Jameson at Hancock Manufacturing, while William's wife is employed by the city school board, which also sources supplies from Hancock. Jameson has a well-established routine. He sends flowers, texts the women, and takes them out to lunch. Usually, he tries to escalate things by luring them to a motel afterward. His pattern with married women is disturbing. He pressures those with kids, and with those without, he offers them a free pass from their husbands. Kyle paused for a moment, took a sip of his coffee, and then continued. Over the past year, Jameson's caused at least 5 divorces in the area. His tactics don't vary much, but they're incredibly effective. He even got sued by a group of husbands in Dallas after he caused a string of broken marriages. The lawsuit got him fired, but now he's back to his old tricks here. We're doing everything we can to stop him. He turned to me. Clark, Are you still handling the cleaning contracts at Hancock Manufacturing and the school board offices? You might be able to find valuable evidence in Rachel's office trash if your team covers those locations. I shook my head. No, unfortunately, we don't cover those areas. That's too bad, Kyle said, clearly disappointed. But keep collecting anything personal from Rachel's trash. Every little bit helps. He then asked, who pays for your wife's phone bill? My company does, I replied. Me, of course, she said, her grin widening. Strictly physical. Nothing more. You need a clear head, and I'm just the girl to help with that. The idea was simple, but it carried a certain weight. Make Rachel face the consequences of her betrayal. The thought was tempting, so tempting that I almost considered it, but I was playing a dangerous game. That night, I was with Rachel, but there was no emotional connection for me. I played the part, but inside, I was already planning my next move. It was a tough act to pull off. By Wednesday morning, the distance between us had only grown. Neither of us was in the mood for our usual quick interaction before work. The tension in the air was palpable. Thursday was looming, the day everything would come to a head. By Wednesday evening, the tension had eased just a little, but it was still there, simmering beneath the surface. Thursday morning, as I was getting ready to leave the house, Rachel suddenly woke up and started yelling something about dinner plans. I ignored her. Around noon, Kyle called with another update. Rachel had messaged Jameson, boasting about preparing a special dinner for me. She promised to fill him in on the details afterward. I decided to get ahead of her. I headed to the grocery store, picking up everything I needed. Chicken, potatoes, vegetables, and a bottle of her favorite white wine. By 2:30 p.m., I was back home, and within a couple of hours, the meal was prepped and the oven was heating up. Just as I was sliding the tray of potatoes in, Rachel came home carrying a few shopping bags. She looked puzzled, clearly not expecting to see dinner already well underway. What are you up to? Rachel asked, eyeing the dinner preparations with confusion as she set her shopping bags down. I grinned broadly, trying to keep the mood light. Just making dinner for my lovely wife. Wanted to make it special before we sit down and have a chat. She looked even more confused, her brow furrowing. I was planning to make dinner too. But after we eat, I have something important to discuss with you. It's going to be a long night. Of course, I replied, turning away with a smile. I had already thrown a wrench in her plans, and she had no idea yet. Dinner was tense. I kept the conversation flowing, deflecting her attempts to steer it toward anything personal. Rachel tried a few times to push the conversation in that direction, but I urged her to enjoy the meal first. Once we were done, I knew it was time to take control. Bring your wine to the kitchen, I said, gesturing toward the kitchen table where I had discreetly placed a folder earlier. Inside was everything she would need to see: evidence, printed emails, photos. She followed me, still unaware of what was coming. I removed a couple of magazines to reveal the folder. Rachel, I began. You know I love you, and I never want to hurt you. But we've been together for a long time, and I've come to realize something. My lack of experience has been bothering me, and it's become more apparent lately. Her eyes widened slightly as she tried to process where this was going. My secretary, Lauren, she's been confiding in me, and I found myself drawn to her stories. They're captivating. I feel like I need to clear my head before we can fully commit to spending our lives together. So, I've booked a hotel for the weekend with her. It's just physical. A chance for me to blow off some steam and try out some new things I can bring back to our marriage. It doesn't change how I feel about you, and I'm telling you beforehand so it won't be seen as cheating. Rachel's face flushed bright red, her expression a mixture of rage and disbelief. Over my dead body, she practically shouted. And I want this woman gone by Monday morning, or we're done. Her reaction was exactly what I'd expected. I couldn't help but laugh. The look on her face was priceless as she realized what was happening. She saw through the game I was playing, the game she had thought she was in control of. Everything she had planned to say, every excuse she had prepared, I had anticipated. I closed the folder and handed it to her. She opened it, revealing a photo on the cover, her and Jameson locked in a kiss. Her face drained of color as she stared at it. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You knew? And you played me?" "Yes," I said calmly, my smile fading. "I knew. Your reaction is exactly how I would have responded if the roles were reversed. But unlike you, I didn't book a hotel. Unlike you, I didn't share lunches, kisses, or conversations about love with someone else. My story was fiction. Yours, however, is very real." As I spoke, she flipped through the folder, her hands trembling. Everything was there: dates, times, photos, emails, transcripts of calls. It was all laid out in black and white. "You followed me," she whispered. "You violated my privacy. How could you?" I stayed composed. "That's the crux of it, Rachel. You've crossed a line, and now it's time for action. You got yourself a boyfriend, had an emotional affair, and were planning to take it physical. You humiliated me and put our marriage on the line. And yet here you are, angry at me for catching you before it was too late." Rachel's eyes filled with tears as she tried to defend herself. "Humiliated? You jeopardized our marriage." "Clark, it wasn't like that." "Separate from us?" I repeated, incredulous. "Straight out of the Cheater's Handbook, you told me earlier that if I had an affair, it would be over your dead body. So why is it okay for you, but not for me?" She opened her mouth to respond, but I raised my hand to stop her. "No, Rachel. There's no such thing as a free pass. If you go through with this, it's cheating. And telling me in advance doesn't change that." Her gaze dropped to the floor, her voice barely audible. I can't deal with this right now. I need to be alone." Without another word, she turned and fled upstairs, taking the folder with her. I heard the bedroom door slam and the lock click into place. I stayed in the kitchen, cleaning up as my mind spun with what to do next. Kyle had set me up with a tablet that allowed me to monitor all of Rachel's phone activity. So I sat down and logged into the tablet. Sure enough, she was messaging Jameson. I scrolled through their conversation, reading the latest exchange. Rachel's message was filled with doubt. She told Jameson she was worried someone might be watching them, that someone had copies of their messages. She even mentioned how I had made dinner for her that night, and how I seemed to know more than I was letting on. Jameson's response was predictable. He told her not to worry, to just go through with the weekend as planned, that everything would be fine. He assured her that her feelings for him were real, and they had to follow through with their plan. His desperation was almost palpable. Rachel, however, was wavering. She admitted she was having second thoughts, that maybe this wasn't the right move. But Jameson kept pushing, telling her it wouldn't be cheating if I knew about it. He insisted it would only make her happier. I shut the tablet and turned on the TV, though my mind was elsewhere. I had already made up my mind to file for divorce, but I was torn between doing it now or waiting until they had actually gone through with it. Part of me wanted to make sure she fully understood the consequences of her actions before I made any final decisions. I called my lawyer and filled him in. "I dropped the bomb on her," I said, "and she's planning to pack her bag and see how I'll react. I don't want to file for divorce until they've actually slept together, but I need her to know I'm serious. Is there any way we can push this?" My lawyer, sharp, ever the strategist, had a suggestion. "We could serve her a letter in her office tomorrow making it clear that you know about the affair, and that, if she goes through with it, divorce proceedings will start the next morning. She'll get the message loud and clear." I agreed, thinking it over. It was the perfect way to show her just how serious I was. Later that night, I checked the tablet again. There were no further messages between Rachel and Jameson. I decided to call it a night. When I reached the bedroom, I half expected the door to still be locked, but it wasn't. I walked in and froze. Rachel was lying in bed, the familiar packed bag sitting against the wall. Seeing that bag sent a wave of emotions crashing over me. My stomach twisted, and for a moment, I just stood there, staring at it. I didn't say a word. I turned around and walked straight out of the room, heading for the guest bedroom. She called after me, pleading, but I ignored her. Lying in bed, fully clothed, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. The bag, packed and ready for her to run off with Jameson, was the final blow. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I let them fall. I had lost something fundamental in our marriage, and there was no coming back from that. The next morning, I heard Rachel moving around downstairs. I stayed in the guest room, waiting, until I finally heard the front door close. When I went down to the kitchen, I saw that the bag was gone. Rachel had unpacked it and put everything away. She was standing by the counter, her face drawn and anxious. My initial reaction was to lash out, but I held back. I suppose this breakfast is your way of showing me what kind of wife you'll be if you sleep with another man. But it doesn't matter if you go through with it. We're done. She looked at me, her eyes pleading, but I didn't let her speak. I've already spoken with the lawyer, I continued, my voice firm. You'll be served with divorce papers tomorrow morning at the hotel. There's no turning back after that. If you come home tonight, we'll start counseling and try to rebuild. But if you leave with him, don't even consider coming back. Rachel's face crumpled, but she said nothing. I glanced at her bag by the door. I assume the bag's already in your car? She turned away, confirming my suspicion without saying another word. Rachel picked up her things, her movements slow, as though each step took more energy than she could summon. She quietly left the house, and the sound of the door closing echoed through the empty kitchen. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the spot where she had been. At least now, Rachel finally understood the gravity of her actions. When I got to the office, Lauren took one look at me and said, "You look terrible." I gave her a half-hearted grin. "You look as stunning as ever." Before she could ask any questions, I added, "I have no idea how things will turn out." When I laid out my plan B, Rachel flew into a rage. She said, "Only over my dead body." This morning, I packed my weekend bag. She was about to receive a letter soon, and we'd see if it rattled her. Lauren brewed more coffee and handed me a cup. "I hope she realizes what she's doing. Surely she can't think this behavior is okay for her. But not for you." I offered her a sad smile and settled at my desk. The day felt unproductive, and just after 11 my phone rang. It was Rachel, and she was crying. "Are you serious?" she sobbed. "Are you really going to divorce me?" It was clear she hadn't expected me to follow through. I didn't hesitate. "If you go through with it, it's a breach of our agreement. You divorce me if I cheated, right?" Her voice was barely audible, but she whispered, "Yes. Will you come home so we can talk?" she pleaded. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I replied and hung up. When I got home, I brewed some coffee. The smell of the bacon she had cooked earlier still lingered in the air. I opened a window to air out the kitchen and sat down. 10 minutes later, Rachel came through the door, holding an envelope from my lawyer in one hand and her weekend bag slung over her shoulder. She dropped the bag at the door, looking unsure whether to come to me or stay back. I poured the coffee and gestured for her to sit down. "So, are you still planning to go to the hotel?" I asked, watching her closely. Her face flushed. "How can you ask that after sending this?" She waved the letter from the lawyer. "Of course I'm not going. I love you. I want to be with you. I canceled everything. But do we need to fix our marriage? Or am I still going to be served with divorce papers?" I studied her for a moment before speaking. "You'll only be served if you show up at that hotel. No hotel, no papers. But our marriage has been damaged. Rachel, this is what's going to happen. First, you're going to call Jameson in front of me, and I want to hear it. Then you're going to delete the personal email account you made for him. After that, you'll report everything to your boss and make sure Jameson's banned from your office. Finally, we'll start counseling to figure out why this happened and how we can rebuild our trust." Just as I finished, her phone rang. It was Jameson. She put it on speaker, and his frustrated voice came through. "Where are you, Rachel?" "I'm waiting at the reception and can't wait any longer." Rachel took a deep breath and said, "Jameson, I'm home with Clark. He did something that made me realize what I was doing. If I go with you, it'll destroy my marriage. I'm sorry, but you're not worth it. I'm not coming." Jameson's anger was palpable. "You're a fool. Do you know how much time, effort, and money I've spent on you? And now you're backing out because your weakling husband threw a tantrum? Screw you," he shouted before hanging up. For the first time, Rachel saw Jameson for what he really was. It wasn't love or care. It was manipulation. She took a moment to gather herself and then began deleting the email account. Took longer than expected, but after an hour it was gone. Not long after, her boss and the HR manager, Marvin Woods, showed up at our door. They looked serious. "Rachel, we're aware of what happened today," Woods said. "To say we're disappointed is an understatement. But we're here to give you a chance to keep your job. Please tell us what happened." Rachel took a deep breath and dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "About 3 months ago, Jameson Nelson took over the Air Metals account I managed. He started with compliments, harmless things about my clothes and hair. But then it got personal. He began flirting, sending me gifts, and eventually asked me to dinner. I let it happen, and I started dressing provocatively to get his attention. Over time, he wore me down with his words, telling me Clark didn't deserve me. And then he convinced me to agree to a weekend with him. But Clark intervened with a letter from his lawyer, and it snapped me out of it. I told Jameson I wasn't going. I've reported everything to HR, and I'm ready to move forward." Woods exchanged a glance with Rachel's boss and then nodded. "Thank you for your honesty, Rachel. Yes, you made a significant error, but you're lucky to have this chance to keep your job. We've had quality issues with Air Metals and we're cutting ties with them. Jameson Nelson will no longer be coming to this office. Let me be clear. If anything like this happens again, you'll be dismissed immediately." Rachel nodded. "I understand." Once they left, Rachel and I sat down to have lunch. Later, we started searching for a marriage counselor. Fortunately, we found one quickly and made an appointment for the next day. The counseling sessions went well over the next 3 months. Rachel realized how Jameson had exploited her fear of our marriage becoming routine. She saw how easily he had manipulated her. As for me, I realized how much we had built together, and I grew to appreciate the strength of our relationship. For years later, we're still together, and Rachel is expecting our first child. We've come a long way, and we're stronger now than ever. As for Jameson, he didn't fare so well. A few months back, he had a nasty fall at the local shopping mall, slipping down a flight of stairs in the parking lot. The police couldn't figure out exactly what happened, but I do know this. There were at least 5 husbands at the mall that day, all of us dressed in black jackets and baseball caps. When the police tried to separate us and ask questions, no one gave anything away. We shuffled around so much they couldn't tell who was sitting where, and none of us were talking. One thing's for sure. Someone made sure Jameson got what he deserved. But as for who, well, that's a secret none of us are ever going to share.